This section for the type, when it first starts out in the directions, I just placed it in there so that you can see it. If you make sure that you hide this so you don't see a little underline that might be confusing, but this is just showing an old school method of how to illustrate this. So the first part is just the lettering. So under the Arial black bold text, did a little bit of the conversion of the type. So when you take a look at this, you can increase or decrease the type to get it close together. The text tool that you use is going to click inside with the option and the arrow. You can tighten this up a little bit or expand it in between each one. So the tracking and the kerning show you distances between one and two characters and the rest. This part here just happens to be red, so I'm just going to duplicate this in case I goof up, but I'll work with the copy. And with the red selected, when you just hold Option Delete, it'll fill the color that you have listed right in there. Usually you have to hit Shift Delete. Okay, and then the type, when it has the section, let's see if I got it in here, the warping of the text. So when you take a look at this, if you haven't seen it up, the arc will blend it up in there a little bit high. You have the bend and the horizontal and vertical distortion, so you can adjust this down a little bit for that selection at least, and a little bit of the highlighting there, so you can change it. And while it's still here, you can free transform this and adjust this. But right now, it's just the text won't work unless it's placed within the warping of that. It has to still be text. The second step is when it goes through this part, it's rendering, warping that type, and then it has you right-click on it and rasterize it. So now you can start to manipulate this. So right-clicking on it will get you to this panel. Same panel that's listed here will give you to the rasterizing of the type. So what that does is it takes it so it's no longer editable type. So if you have a copy of it or copy it at that time, that's a good chance to do it. But that's basically what that is. And now it's going to use that piece to create the image. So as it shoots through this, it says extrude. The extrusion of the blur is what it's going to build up to be. So it's kind of a unique way to put this together. So under filter, when you take a look at it, it's going to be the blur and motion blur. And depending on your resolution will determine some of the distances here. Here's the window you can't see, but if you subtract it a little bit till it zooms out, and then you can use the hand tool to build that up, so just so you can see what's happening. This is just going at minus 45, so just typing that in, and you'll notice this little diagram, you can scurry that around as well. They have 80 pixels for the distance right here, so you can adjust that and see what's happening. So it's just giving you the distance of how large that distance for the shadow will be. So I'm just going to increase a little bit, and that's what happens. So it's got this blurred layer to it. I'm going to undo that and undo that. Let's see, edit. Let's see if I can bring that back. Yeah. So I made a mistake right there. To make sure that I copied that layer. So this is the layer again. So here it is. Just backtrack a little bit. Warping the text. Arching them a little bit. See if that's going to do it. Okay, so that'll give me a little bit of the warp right there. And again, bring this over there. Type. Okay, so here's the arch for it. Minimize it down, increase that part, and And that gives that piece. So that's where it's going to rotate it just a little bit and shrink it down just a little. Click OK. So once this is done, this is where you can rasterize it and duplicate the layer and hide this duplicated. So this one is where you have the filter. So I'm just going to click on the motion blur and it'll show up right away. And then you're to duplicate this layer. So the shortcut under layer, and you can do the same, new and a copy is the J, Command J. So while that layer is selected, if you Command J, you can make 10 of these copies. So I'm just going to Shift key them in the Layers panel and merge them together. And what that has done is made 10 copies into one. And I can do the same thing. I'll do a few more, but they just do 2. And what it's going to do is to try to even give it a more depth to this than you could before. So 20 times 10 adding into that piece. So I'm going to duplicate it a couple more times just to see. And Command E to flatten them out. So you have this layer plus the original on top. So that's what that looks like. So that's what this is showing through the directional part. And then it gets to this section where you're doing the duplication. So 20 of those layers and then duplicating it so you have 40. It's just trying to give you as much as possible. Then the layer that had the original selection, it's going to be on top. So this layer that's on top. And if I just double click, it'll bring me up to the color overlays. I'm just going to click on this one. This has yellow to it. And it also has the stroke. And you can now see at least a little bit. That's how my depth isn't that large, just because the resolution is different between the two files. So that's what's happening. So this is the selection. Then you're taking this with the Command key to select this, going to select inverse, or Command Shift I. And now when you take a look, you're going to be on this layer down below. Just make sure that layer is selected. Taking the eraser tool, so when you take a look at the eraser tool, a hard-edged eraser, and using, make sure you have that selected. Okay, so that's what you're doing, is you're then removing the parts that have the shadow. Use the bracket keys, the cap locks key. So what this does, it allows you to start to eliminate the pieces. And if you hold the Shift key down, it'll come across. So as you're looking at this, trying to have the shadow be from the top, this you might see. So I'm just going to click on that. And same with this one. You might see this part up to here, and this one coming up. So you're taking a look at that shadow line. Same with this part of the D. You probably wouldn't see that. If you click and hold the Shift key down, it'll make a straight line for yourself. So here I'm going right to that edge and trying to estimate how far it's going to come out. So that gives me that little bit of a shadow on that piece. This one's a little trickier, so I have to use the edge of the D shadow and Shift key and drop it down this direction. And you can see it kind of building itself. So like I said, there's a couple ways that the 3D modeling it makes a little different, but that gives you that shadowing. And like I said, the blur, the size, I could have made it much larger in order to bring that together. And then the last part is just doing a little bit more of the shading after this is done. So this is taken down from these two parts. And then here's their, it says 20 seconds to shade it, but depending on how quick you are. So again, this is the shadow. And you can shade it right on top. You can even do it a layer above it. But with the layer, just lock the pixels in it so that those are the ones. That's just with the eraser, just to show it to you. and just go to the default. Take a look at the opacity of the brush, just put it down low. Click a soft edge brush, and since it's clicked outside, just to show you, make sure it's on that piece. Let's see if I did that right. Oh, wrong tool, how'd that jump out of there? Okay, so 22% of the soft edge brush. So this is a little harder. So click that. Oh, that's what that's doing. There we go. And change the opacity down to this, about 10%. So now you can see that you can put a little tone in there. And again, if you just click with the brush that large, you can get that size. If the brush is smaller, just click and hold the shift key to create the straight line that brings this apart. And that's going to give you a little bit of a shadow that you can work from. Let's see if that's going to blend it in there so you can kind of get an idea. I think I have a dotted line. And keep in mind your presets. This is their brush settings. Just remember the spacing. So this is a good way to just bring that together. So you can see that's the dark side of it. I'm going to minimize down the opacity a little more. And bring it down here. And if you really want to get the edge, just use the lasso tool and you can double click like that. And the brush will be on the top of this one. So you can use it for the highlighting of it. And you can swiftly inverse the selection and jump right back to this part. And that'll give you a dark value to build that up. So when you take a look at how it's drawn in there, you can draw it freehand. Like here's a nice curve for the D. Here's one for this part, maybe even under the A. Couple shadow pieces there. So you can kind of get an idea. Or you can take the lasso tool and just kind of make shapes that'll be selected. Hold the shift key down or use the option for it. And that's what this is trying to do. So I didn't do too many letters, but that gives you the highlighting of that piece with the brush. And again, that's the selection that's going to hit it up at the top. And if I inverse it and just pick black, then that's when I have this part to build up on that section. So deselect it, tab key, hit the letter F, and there's your selection that you can then just quickly do a screenshot from that part, and you're all set.